The chandeliers trembled with the hum of gossip. Every eye turned toward the grand staircase, and there she was. Lady Rose, glowing beneath 1,000 candles, her gown shimmering like morning light over the Thames. Tonight, London held its breath. For this was not just another ball. This was the night when a prince would choose his partner, and a young lady's future could be sealed with a single dance. The story begins in the heart of London. At the height of the season, that glittering stretch of weeks when nobility gathered not just for pleasure, but for purpose. The streets smelled faintly of rain and roses. Carriages lined up before the grand doors of Mayfair's most splendid ballroom, their wheels whispering secrets of who had arrived and who had not. Inside, the world sparkled. Gold candlelight reflected from every crystal, filling the room with a soft glow that made even the coldest hearts believe in romance. Gentle laughter floated through the air, blending with the rustle of silk gowns and the steady rhythm of a string quartet warming up. Men in tailored coats bowed, women in jeweled gloves curtsied, every gesture rehearsed, every smile a silent performance in this play of society. But behind the glitter lay a quiet tension. Every young lady knew that each dance, each word, could change the path of her life. Marriage was not just a matter of affection. It was a matter of alliances, families, fortunes. Beneath the perfume and politeness, ambition lingered. And then, through the murmuring crowd, came her name. Lady Rose McClare, the youngest of her family, known for her laughter, her energy, her defiance of dull expectations. Tonight was her debut into society, her first grand ball of the London season. And though her smile was bright, her heart raced faster than the violins that played beyond the double doors. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. Remember? Rose. Grace before wit. A lady must never outshine the room, only light it gently. But Rose was not made for gentle. Her eyes carried mischief, her step curiosity. As the footman announced her name, a hush rippled through the hall. Heads turned. Upstairs, the Prince of Denmark, tall, reserved, his uniform catching the glow of the chandeliers, looked down from the gallery. He had danced with duchesses, smiled for queens. Yet something about that flash of gold, that fearless tilt of Rose's chin, drew his gaze. The orchestra began a soft waltz. Conversations hushed. The air thickened with promise. Lady Rose, barely 19, felt the weight of every gaze upon her, and yet she smiled. Not because she was ready, but because, for the first time, she felt alive. And as the clock struck 9, the grand doors opened wider. The ball was about to begin. Music swelled through the ballroom like a rising tide, soft and golden. Every corner shimmered with candlelight. Every shadow whispered secrets. The scent of roses and polished oak drifted through the air. This was the grandest night of the season, the night when names were remembered. When hearts made silent promises beneath chandeliers older than time, Lady Rose stood near the edge of the marble floor, her fingers brushing the lace at her sleeve. Around her, laughter rang like crystal bells. Women in gowns of silver and cream moved in graceful circles, their jewels flashing like stars. Gentlemen bowed with perfect ease, every movement rehearsed, every smile carefully measured. But Rose, she didn't fit into this rhythm. Her heart beat faster than the music, and her eyes wandered beyond the practiced elegance of it all. From the orchestra's corner came a soft cue, a violin humming a tender note, calling the dancers forward. The master of ceremonies lifted his hand, and the first waltz began. Couples stepped onto the floor like waves meeting shore, their movements smooth and bright. But in the middle of the room, a small space remained open, waiting for someone meant to fill it. Up above, from the balcony draped in velvet, the prince watched quietly. His expression, unreadable, his posture, precise. But there was something different in his eyes tonight, a faint curiosity, a question he could not name. He had danced with noblewomen from every corner of Europe, bowed to queens and smiled for portraits, yet none had stirred him beyond duty. Until now, his gaze found Rose, not because she sparkled brighter than the rest, but because she didn't seem to try. She was watching the dance, not to be seen, but to feel. When the candlelight caught her hair, it looked like liquid gold. When she moved, it wasn't to impress, but to breathe. And just then, as if guided by fate's quiet hand, the orchestra shifted. A new melody, softer, slower, almost secret. The prince descended from the balcony. Murmurs rippled through the guests like wind through silk. His footsteps echoed against the marble, each one steady, deliberate, unstoppable. The crowd parted as he approached. Rose felt the air change. Every sound around her blurred, every thought paused. He stopped before her, his gloved hand extending a silent invitation. She hesitated, just for a heartbeat, then placed her hand in his. The world exhaled. As they stepped into the light, the whispers began. Some curious, some envious, some shocked. But Rose heard none of it. All she could feel was the rhythm of the waltz, soft, steady, pulling her into a world where titles and names did not matter. The prince's hand was warm, his steps sure. Together they moved, turning slowly beneath the chandelier. The music carried them like wind over water. The moment was not rehearsed. It's not planned. It was alive. And as the orchestra rose to its crescendo, their eyes met for the briefest second. In that glance, something unspoken passed between them. Not a promise, not yet, but the beginning of one. The ballroom had seen 1,000 dances before, but that night, for those few minutes, it watched a story being written, one that even time would struggle to forget. The waltz had ended, yet the air refused to rest. Soft echoes of music lingered, trembling against the tall windows and the gold-framed mirrors. The guests applauded politely, their claps light and measured, but the moment between Lady Rose and the prince did not dissolve. It held, it breathed. He offered his arm, and she took it, unsure why her hand trembled. Together they drifted away from the crowd, through the sweeping archways of the ballroom, into a quieter corridor lined with portraits of kings long gone. The candle flames there danced slower, their light softer, more secretive. The hum of laughter faded behind them until only silence remained, a silence that spoke more than words ever could. Rose glanced up at him, curious. He was calm, almost distant but not cold. His presence carried something still, the kind of quiet strength that does not need to be shown to be felt. When he turned toward her, she saw not the weight of his crown, but the loneliness beneath it. And for a brief, unguarded instant, he looked not like a prince, but like a man simply searching for something real. He smiled, not a courtly gesture, but a small, uncertain smile that almost didn't belong in a palace. "Do you always escape the crowd so easily?" he asked softly. Rose hesitated, then laughed, her voice light as air. Only when the crowd forgets to breathe, their laughter echoed softly, blending with the distant hum of the orchestra, restarting another dance. For a moment, the world outside the corridor seemed far away. They stood beneath a grand painting of a long-forgotten queen, a woman who had once danced, once dreamed, once loved as fiercely as the legends claimed. Rose turned toward the window. Beyond it, London glowed, lamps flickering through mist, carriages gliding through wet streets, a city alive with secrets. "Does it ever feel strange?" she asked quietly. "To have the world watch you, but never see you?" The prince looked at her, truly looked as if no one had ever asked him that before. His answer came slowly, like truth hesitating on his tongue. Every day. Something shifted between them, invisible, delicate, yet powerful. The kind of connection that doesn't demand attention, but simply exists. Undeniable, from the ballroom, a faint melody floated back toward them, another dance beginning. Another chance to return to the world they were meant to belong to. But neither moved. The music played, and still, they stayed. For the first time that evening, Rose felt no pressure to be graceful, charming, or perfect. She was simply herself, and that was enough. He extended his hand once more, quietly. One more dance? This time, she didn't hesitate. And as they stepped back toward the light, the whispers grew again, but neither heard them. The world could watch, the season could gossip. History could record, yet, in that moment, there were only two souls moving through 1,000 candles. Writing a story that would never need a title, the music began again, not loud, not grand, but gentle, as if the orchestra itself had learned to whisper. The ballroom floor gleamed beneath the light of 100 candles. And in the center of it all, Lady Rose and the prince stood facing each other. The world around them blurred, faces melted into shadow, voices became wind. It was as if London itself paused to watch. The first note of the waltz touched the air like silk. He stepped forward. She followed. The rhythm found them steady as a heartbeat. Their movements were slow, deliberate, full of meaning they dared not speak. Every turn carried a quiet grace, every glance a question left unanswered. The prince's hand rested lightly on hers, firm enough to guide, gentle enough to respect. Rose's gown flowed like liquid gold as she turned. Her breath caught with every spin, yet she did not falter. The crowd saw perfection. Only she knew the wild flutter of her heart. It wasn't fear, it was something unfamiliar, thrilling, alive. The prince said nothing. He didn't need to. His silence spoke in rhythm in the way he looked at her, as though he'd found something rare in a room full of everything. The distance between them was proper, polite, quiet yet charged with unspoken warmth. The chandeliers above trembled slightly, scattering light across the marble like falling stars. The violins swelled, the cellos sighed, the two of them moved as though carried by the music rather than bound to it. At the edge of the room, the others watched, nobles, debutantes, dowagers, their expressions a blend of admiration and unease. The daughter of a Scottish lord dancing with a foreign prince? It was scandal and poetry in one breath. But Rose did not care. She was not dancing for them. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. It was brief, no longer than a heartbeat. But something infinite passed between them. Recognition, understanding, a quiet ache neither could name. The music slowed, fading to a tender hum. Their steps grew softer, their movements smaller, closer. The air seemed to thicken, heavy with unsaid words. Rose could hear her pulse in her ears. The prince leaned ever so slightly forward, his voice a near whisper. "You dance as if you've always belonged here." She smiled, barely. "Or as if I never have." The orchestra struck the final note, long lingering, like a sigh at the end of a dream. Applause followed, polite and measured, but the sound felt distant, unreal. For them, time had already moved on. He bowed, she curtsied. And for a moment, their hands lingered, fingers brushing, unwilling to part. Then the crowd folded around them again, breaking the spell with chatter and clinking glasses. But deep inside, both knew. This dance had changed something. Not just the night, not just their names, but the way their hearts would beat from this moment forward. In a world where every step was rehearsed and every word. They had found something that was not planned. Something true. The applause faded. But the echo of the dance lingered in the air like a ghost, refusing to leave. The orchestra began a new tune, lively, cheerful, meant for the crowd. Yet Rose and the prince stood motionless, as though time itself had forgotten to move them along. Around them, laughter filled the space, but it no longer belonged to their world. He leaned closer, his voice low, steady. "You shouldn't look at me like that," he murmured. Though his eyes said he wished she would never stop. Rose tilted her head, curious, but calm. "And how do I look at you, Your Highness?" He paused, the kind of pause that holds 1,000 unsaid things, as if I'm a man, and not a crown. The words hung between them, soft as breath, sharp as truth. For a moment, Rose forgot the crowd, the titles, the rules that built the very walls around them. She saw him, not the heir, not the prince, but someone tired of being everything to everyone and nothing to himself. A passing guest interrupted with a polite bow. The prince answered with a nod, his expression cool again, but his hand brushed hers as if to anchor her there, to remind her the moment wasn't gone. "Walk with me," he said quietly. They slipped away through a side corridor lined with red velvet drapes and portraits of ancestors too proud to smile. The music faded behind them, placed by the sound of their steps and the faint crackle of candle flames. Outside, The terrace waited, cold marble kissed by moonlight. The city stretched beyond, glowing faintly through a veil of fog. The night air touched Rose's skin, and for the first time all evening, she breathed freely. The prince stood beside her, silent. For a while neither spoke. The only sound was the rustle of her gown and the distant hum of carriages rolling over cobblestones. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "They say a prince must never love for himself. That love is a luxury of simpler men." Rose turned, her voice barely a whisper. "Do you believe that?" He met her gaze, the candlelight trembling between them. "I used to. There is no music now, no audience. Only two souls standing on the edge of a world too fragile to hold them." The prince took a small step closer. Not enough to scandalize, just enough to let the truth exist. His tone softened, almost breaking. "If I dance with you again, it won't be because of duty." Rose's breath caught, her heartbeat unsteady. "Then why?" He smiled faintly, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Because I'd rather remember one true dance than a lifetime of empty ones." For a second, everything froze. The wind, the music, the city itself, as though even London dared not disturb them. And then the door opened behind them. The ballroom's golden light spilled onto the terrace. Their world snapped back into motion. The prince straightened, his mask of grace returning. "The night must continue," he said quietly. Rose nodded, but her heart carried the whisper, not the words, but the feeling beneath them, a promise that would echo long after the candles had burned to dust. The last notes of the waltz drifted into silence, curling through the chandeliers like smoke. The ballroom had begun to empty, though the night still shimmered with the echo of laughter and perfume. Servants moved quietly, collecting forgotten gloves and half-finished glasses of champagne. Yet for Lady Rose, the world remained suspended, caught between what had been said and what still lingered unsaid. She stood near the grand doors, the cool marble beneath her hands grounding her against the swirl of memory. The prince had returned to the gathering, surrounded now by nobles and diplomats, smiling with the grace expected of him. Yet even across the sea of faces and titles, Rose could feel his presence like a flame that refused to go out. Their eyes met once, brief, almost accidental, but it carried the weight of everything they could not speak aloud. 100 words lived in that single glance, and none dared escape. The orchestra began to pack away their instruments. The chandeliers dimmed one by one until the golden light became a whisper of what it once was. The ballroom moments ago, alive and loud, turned into something fragile, almost sacred. Rose's aunt appeared beside her, her voice soft and composed. "A splendid evening, wasn't it? I do hope you made a fine impression." Rose nodded, though her thoughts were far away. An impression, yes, but on whom? The thought almost made her smile. The prince, still among his people, raised a glass in polite farewell. To the room, it was nothing more than courtesy. But to her, it was a quiet message, a silent goodnight dressed in formality. She returned the gesture with a subtle nod, a farewell no one else would notice. Outside, the carriages lined up in the mist. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of lilacs and rain. Rose stepped onto the cobblestone path, her gown brushing against the stones, her heartbeat still not her own. Behind her, the grand doors closed with a soft thud, a sound that felt final. Almost a final. Inside the ballroom, a single candle still burned. Perhaps forgotten, perhaps waiting. Its flame flickered weakly against the empty mirrors. As if refusing to admit that the night was over, Rose paused before stepping into the carriage. For a moment, she turned back toward the great house, her reflection faint in the window's glass. The whispers of the evening played again in her mind, the prince's words. Soft and lingering, "I'd rather remember one true dance." She exhaled slowly, her breath fogging against the cool air. Somewhere behind those walls, he was likely doing the same to hearts divided by silence and distance, bound only by memory. The horses began to move. The city rolled past, lights blurring, laughter fading. Rose watched as the grand windows of the ballroom disappeared behind the mist. And though the season would bring countless other nights, countless other dances, she knew deep down that none would ever feel like this one. Because some moments don't belong to time. They belong to memory, and this night would live there forever. Morning came softly, like a secret it didn't want to tell. London woke beneath a pale sky, its streets damp with last night's rain. The city had forgotten the music, the lights, the whispers of the ball, but for Lady Rose, the echoes still lived quietly in her heart. The house was silent. Servants moved through the halls like ghosts, clearing away the traces of a night that had already become a memory. The scent of roses still lingered faintly, faint but stubborn. Refusing to vanish, in her room, Rose stood before the mirror. The same one where she had dressed hours ago with trembling hands and a hopeful smile. Now her reflection looked different. Softer, older somehow, touched by something she couldn't quite name. Her gown lay folded across a chair, its shimmer dulled by daylight, its purpose already spent. On her dresser sat a single rose, pale pink, wrapped in a silver ribbon. No note, no crest, no name. But she knew. It wasn't a token of promise. It was a memory preserved, delicate, real, and enough. She picked it up gently, holding it as if it were the last moment of the night itself. Outside, the sound of carriage wheels began again. Another day of London life starting as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But something had.